Hey folks, this week's episode features a panel of guests and is in two parts. In the first part, we discuss the commodification of shared experience and what the world might look like without the expectation that alcohol is a precursor to socialization. And in the second part, we try to posit how we can create space for people practicing all types of sobriety, whether they're in recovery or whether they're sober for other reasons, or whether there might be drug or alcohol-related trauma in their past. Joining us for this episode are our friends Prateek, Brian Huntress, and Devri Goodspeed, and the song you're hearing right now is a new song of Prateek's called Guess I'm Just No Fun, that he wrote about this very topic. And we did decide to release this episode on St. Patrick's Day, rather ironically, but in another sense, given the purpose of our show, it's not ironic at all, because especially when it comes to holidays like this, it's so easy to feel alienated when you can't celebrate in the same way as others do, or when you're made to feel afraid that you won't be understood for your personal choices or your personal sensitivities. And that's why we felt this conversation was necessary, because especially as the world opens back up and the pandemic becomes less of a threat, we want everyone to be able to go back into the world with newfound agency and conviction, and to be able to stand up for themselves and be advocates of the world they want to live in. Enjoy the show.
Don't stay up all night long till the morning sun. Yes, I'm just no fun. Yes, I'm just.
Okay, so we're all here to talk about sober spaces. What I haven't told any of you, I don't think, is that we're releasing this on St. Patrick's Day.
Oh.
So we're doing a bit of a
Yes.
a bit of a contrarian thing, maybe, but I don't know that it should be contextualized that way. But sober spaces are a very important issue to all of us. And I think for all of us, probably for slightly different reasons. So this might get interesting. I think the overlap is going to be like the majority of our feelings, but just experientially, we might kind of differ with like why we think they're necessary or what we've benefited from and whatnot. So let's get into it. I'm not sure how to do this with 5 people.
All right, let's go around and say our names.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Oh, man.
I was just thinking that, though. That would be the perfect way to open this.
I kind of wanted to just say off the top, from the beginning, that everything that we're saying is true to us and our experiences, and maybe completely different for someone else who doesn't drink.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing about this is generalized. It's just our takes.
Definitely.
So we have a wide range of experiences here, too, because Brian and I have both run sober spaces in the past.
Yeah.
I think Prateek mostly prefers to play them, as do I.
More or less.
Yeah. I've seen Matt play all sorts of different spaces.
I think I prefer to hang out in them, but I don't care where I play necessarily.
Yeah.
I think running them has been a really important part of my DIY experience, because every DIY space I've ever run or contributed to is usually technically illegal in some way.
Right.
Not even if it's not in a real outlaw way. It's the thing could be shut down for any old reason.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that's just purely practical is that if the police show up to a noise complaint and there's alcohol there are drugs or something, they're gonna, I don't know, it might be worse, but I've had shows where the police show up and it's an absolute chaos, loud as shit, very disruptive, but there's just no alcohol. And they're just some of the times they haven't even really, they're well, this is weird. Or they don't even know how to then they don't shut it down. They're yeah, could you guys just stop yelling? And then we're yeah, we'll be done by 10, dude. Thanks. And then they're whatever. That was weird.
And that's that.
But I guess to shorten my point, I think that a sober space, purely from a legal and longevity standpoint, can really, really add to the lifespan of a DIY venue.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are house venues that have existed all over the city of Boston that are only there for like 2 months, and they get shut down instantly because they were just pure chaos, like college party bullshit. And that's like, I don't know. And I mean, the party is a really important part for some people. Some people just want to fucking party, and that's fine. They're, do your thing, but that's not really the point for me, I guess. And it's not really a big part of the art and cultural experience, I guess.
So we were talking just now specifically about DIY spaces. We do see some sober spaces that are commercial spaces or that are more collective spaces that aren't just purely DIY. I'm thinking specifically about like the coffee houses and the Unitarian churches, great scene, usually sober, but not as commercialized, not necessarily as well attended. Why are sober spaces not well attended sometimes when they are DIY spaces, they're not well attended. But aside from that, like, why is it not commercialized as much as it could be?
A lack of creativity, I think.
Yeah. A lack of creativity, and the fact that music and alcohol kind of go hand in hand, and any profitable music venture is basically there to sell beer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
a bunch of musicians that I really love and respect have basically said independently of each other that like, my job is to be a beer salesman. I was like,
damn.
So like, they're not bitter about it. They get it. But like, that's kind of a big part of the perception is just like, music, booze.
Yeah.
You're not going to have music. You're not really going to have music without booze because that doesn't make money.
Does that change like what's available to you guys as far as opportunities? Like if your following isn't going to be selling alcohol, is it more likely that you won't be asked back to certain venues?
I've
Absolutely.
seen that, yeah.
I think too, this kind of circles back to our first discussion where we were talking about how there really aren't any institutions around that just support music for music's sake, that are accessible to people that aren't either rich or part of an important institution, because there is absolutely an audience of people who love music because they love music and they love artists just because they want to support the arts. But like those people are us really, or they're, you know what I mean? They're not institutions or people, or the National Endowment of the Arts isn't like creating DIY spaces. And I think what is happening a lot is the arbiters of who lives and who dies and what music is played and what isn't, like Prateek said, are people that want to sell beer. Yep. They're entrepreneurs that have opened a restaurant or a club. Yep. They're not patrons of the arts.
Yep. And then even on like the really, really big levels, like TD Garden or all the stadiums, like they're there to sell Bud Light.
Yeah.
That's pretty much their thing.
Well, plus, and like from the audience perspective, me and Devri were actually talking about this yesterday, I think. It can be politicized really easily. Like the fact that sober spaces are kind of their own thing. It makes it very easy to assign certain dogmas or ideologies and things to that idea. Yeah. So it sort of inherently alienates people who aren't willing to look a little bit further, because it's sometimes it's even hard to discern that like whatever the difference is between straight edge and sober. Like it's not necessarily that people are going to actively come at you for drinking or something, but sometimes space is just a place where you don't drink, you don't do drugs, versus a straight edge place where it's like sometimes they will hit you with a fucking pipe if you come by with a beer. So it's like there's so many like disambiguations that have to happen in that conversation that don't typically happen in the public. They happen within like the scenes where where people care, but I feel like that gives it kind of like a hokey context to a lot of people where it's like, oh, I can't drink, like what?
No, I completely agree with that, and I also want to build off of that to say that I think drinking is pretty much hand in hand with community.
Yeah.
If someone says they're going out, where do you think they're going? Probably a bar or probably to somebody's house to get shit-faced.
Yeah.
In reality, they could be, in reality, especially if it was a person who like doesn't drink, they could be going anywhere. They're just like, oh yeah, I'm going to a show. Oh yeah, I'm going to this concert. Oh yeah, I'm going to hang out in my friend's backyard. Oh yeah, I'm going to go to the reservoir and stare at the stars for a little bit. But I think there's just this idea that, not even just this idea, alcohol and community are, at least in the US, At least in my experience, they've always been just completely intertwined. And the minute that you tell somebody, like Matt was saying, that it's like, oh, I can't drink, it's just like their brain immediately shuts off. They're not interested.
Right.
Yeah, it's like communion, bread breaking. Like it's a universal communal thing. Like I've had people offer me, a pipe or a drink or alcohol or something as a way to let me know that I'm a guest. I'm welcome here. You're my friend.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll be like, oh, no, thanks. And people are it's weird that I didn't. Not because I feel insecure about it, but because it could be considered kind of a passive aggressive thing to refuse a drink.
No, totally.
Right.
Not drink with someone. Like, I'm not drinking with you. And some people who aren't familiar with that lifestyle or that, not drinking for no particular reason, whether you're sober or straight edge or not, just choosing not to.
Yeah.
And be kind of a strange to some.
Yeah, I was actually saying to Joel one time, that's part of the reason I smoke cigarettes is I found that was a nice middle ground. Like I enjoy them too, but like I found that if I don't smoke pot and if I don't drink, people just think I'm a cop, if I'm just outside leaning against a wall. They're like, what the hell? And taking notes. Like I'm always writing in my notebook. They're like, what the hell are you doing? So like if you smoke a cigarette, all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay. Like he's one of us again.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And it's so weird how many different types of scenes that has happened. But it's true. It's a norm.
It's totally,
like
it's totally not. Even around like the most white collar, uptight people, if you're not having a beer, you're a weirdo.
Yeah.
Yep.
What the
Well,
hell?
it's weird how quickly people get defensive if you're not drinking and they are. They think that you're judging them. It's like, oh, well, I have to drink or I want to drink. It's like I didn't say anything about you drinking. I just said I'm not.
Yeah.
It's like telling somebody you're vegan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like that kind of.
It can carry those implications.
Yeah.
And it limits what you can share with somebody.
Yeah, that's true.
It limits the shared experience. I actually took a big step about a year ago in like kind of mitigating part of this for myself. Before I tell this story, if you don't drink, if you're sober, like you might have a variety of reasons for being sober. So this is not a story that should be like encouraging anybody to just like, oh, try it out, see if you can still drink. But for me, the reason that I didn't drink for years was just I got tired of the social pressure. And it seemed that shared experience relied solely on alcohol. Got tired of it. So, but a year ago, Kate and I were down in Baltimore, and we went out to this like really cool kind of Mexican restaurant dive bar with a friend of hers. And I just decided in that moment, like, why shouldn't I be able to take part in this the way that everyone else is taking part in this? So I ordered a beer just to see, like, how does this experience feel to me? And I'm not in recovery or anything, so this is not me, like, endangering myself. This is not me
relapsing.
like, relapsing or anything. But I was just like, how does this feel? And is it going to make me uncomfortable to, like, adhere to social expectations, or is it going to be me taking back agency in this way? And it worked really well. And then I just kind of spent like the next month or so, just like every once in a while having a beer with dinner and seeing how this feels. Like I'm alone, and this is not me like getting drunk alone. It's just me like having a beer, seeing if I can take back like, or rid myself of the stigma, I guess. Rid myself of like the social stigma that this is like something we need to do with each other all the time. Can I actually make the choice to either do this alone or with people? Or can I make the choice to decide what this means to me? And it doesn't have to mean to me what it's going to mean to somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. And something I've been thinking about recently that has become more prevalent, as I don't know if you guys heard people talk about harm reduction in terms of addiction treatment.
Yeah.
Where I was actually talking about this exact same subject to somebody like 2 nights ago. And I kind of posed the idea that there are some circumstances, like I was at a show, Devri might remember this. This was at the Puzzle Factory probably 2 years ago now, which is crazy, but where there was a guy that was there that was on drugs.
I wasn't there for this, but we got updates the whole time.
Yeah. And this guy was blatantly on drugs. He wasn't not weed or alcohol, and he fainted, he collapsed, and it was fucking insane. And it was like, it felt like a medical emergency.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was the organizer of the show and the person responsible for the venue, And technically the person in charge, these people that he was with, thought that they'd be telling on him if they told me what the fuck was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So these people, it was like this secret that this guy was on drugs, and now he's fucking collapsing, and now I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if I need to call an ambulance or kick him out or what's going on. And looking back, it would have been so much easier if these people were just like, oh, dude, he took ketamine. Sorry. And I could have been like, oh, shit. Like, all right, man, here's a glass of water. Like, hope you're okay or something.
Yeah.
Like, and like, I don't think we didn't even kick the guy out. He was safe. He didn't die or go to the hospital or anything. But I was just thinking, like, what if there was it's not a sober space or a safe space or a safer or soberer space, but what if there was a space where, like, if somebody was on drugs, it was fine and, you know, communicated, and like almost like I, as the organizer, was consenting to have somebody there on drugs. Like, if I was able to do that,
Yeah.
like, would that have been safer for me? I could have acted with that liability in mind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Kind of weird. It's kind of a weird perspective, but
Well, that's the thing. I think it's the liability factor.
I would actually argue that a big part of the reason that those spaces don't exist is because they only don't exist for non-socially acceptable drugs. They exist for socially acceptable drugs, and they're called bars.
Yeah.
yeah, right. True. Yeah.
Well, that even raises the question, what are socially acceptable drugs?
Exactly.
Depends
Exactly.
who you're talking to.
And if they're not
Yup.
socially acceptable, should you be taking them socially?
Yep.
Right. Like, I don't think that we should have people like shooting heroin at a house show. Like,
No.
that would be horrible. But like, if I'm as the organizer of a show, if there's somebody there that is on like Molly, or like maybe they did coke before they showed up, I don't want that to happen. But if they're there and I don't know that they're on drugs, that's a lot more unsafe than if I did know. Because if somebody did overdose or had a medical emergency, I coincidentally have some experience and like, and I would know what to do. Like, you know, roll someone on their side. If you have Narcan, I know how to administer that. So I guess what I'm saying, that if I was in a social setting and there was somebody there that was going to use an IV drug like fentanyl or heroin, I would 100% prefer to know that they were doing it. Not so I could kick them out or alienate them, but so they don't die in my bathroom.
Right.
That's like such a complicated issue, but it just kind of, I thought, was an interesting thing to bring up in this context, because I don't know. There's nothing worse than I've seen people secretly drink for a whole show, get pretty buzzed by the end of the show, and then get in their car and leave. And I'm like, fuck, dude.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and so actually based off of that, and I think the fact that it's sort of like acceptable to do that with alcohol, and maybe not with certain other drugs. I was on tour, this would have been like 5 years ago maybe, and I was playing a show in Ohio, and this guy kept trying to get me to drink a shot, and I was the one who had the car, so I had to drive.
yeah.
And the guy just wouldn't take no for an answer, so I took the shot, and I'm a lightweight, and I'm really I'm like 5'8" and skinny. What do you want from me? And I'm really glad that, like, you know, that was like the only thing I had that evening. But even so, I was like pretty scared to drive back to the place that we were staying at. The musician I was with, and I was just like, fuck, what if I get pulled over? You know, and drugs and groups of people and how much information people say or don't say, it's a big mess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It just really is.
They almost feel like separate issues to me. It's almost, that's where it starts to become adjacent to like the safe space issue and things like that. Because for me at least, the whole concept of a sober space is just that. It's just a place where there isn't this one particular social element. And that seems like a good place to kind of end that, you know, like beyond that, it's like, all right, well then we can start involving different ideologies or different, I don't know, like social beliefs that everyone might have, which is like, all right, if you're on drugs though, we can talk about it. Or if you're on drugs, we're going to beat the shit out of you out back. Or if you're on drugs, great, give me some drugs. Like that is almost a separate issue, because I've seen that vary so much between different spaces. like if I played like 3 sober spaces this weekend, they would probably all have a slightly different mentality about what sober means, what space means, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've been to sober spaces where everyone was smoking weed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sober space, dude.
Yeah.
Well, comes from the earth, man.
Yep.
Well, because that's the thing. It's like even the concept of like drugs can be such a moving target. Because I know so many people that consider themselves sober and smoke so much goddamn weed.
Yeah.
And it's like you couldn't drive a car right now. Like you're probably not sober by my personal definition of sober for me. So there's a lot of like different gray areas with this.
Yep. And then like I know sort of another side of that, which is like I've always had trouble with the word sober. So like recently I've just decided to start calling what I do straight edge because I don't drink, I quit cigarettes, I don't do weed anymore, but I don't feel right saying that I'm sober because so many of the people I know who use the word sober, a lot of them actually they struggle with addiction. They're in recovery and they have to sort of relearn life without substances. And for me, it wasn't really like that.
Yeah, I struggle with that too. I never really know what to call it. I don't know. I usually just say like I don't really drink. And for me, it's alcohol specific. I don't really smoke weed that much anymore either, but from time to time I'll go through a phase. But I grew up, I just one day realized in my late 20s that I'd had a lot of friendships that were solely, like the only shared experience was that we would smoke weed together or that we would drink together. And I started kind of deconstructing that and realizing that it was very, like a toxic way to be. And I kind of very passive aggressively just like stopped going to the bar to like meet up with them. But I mean, it was uphill from there. Like it was, now I'm going to start checking out sober spaces. Now I'm going to start, seeing what is, for me, this is all about shared experience. So like, what is shared experience without substance? What is shared experience without expectation or without peer pressure, social pressure? And like a year or two after I started doing this, like this kind of like social experiment for myself is when I started running a sober space and just like, well, we'll see. Like by definition, it had to be because the space I was running was in a building where like drinking would have been a huge liability issue. So I was like, well, that kind of fits with my whole mission statement right now. So let's try it out and see how it goes. And I loved it. I loved like just taking that expectation out of it. And like the shared experience is the music, or the shared experience is, and I think there's a like delineation between the shared experience is we're all sober together, and the shared experience is we're all doing what doesn't require substance.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
To the other side of that, I would also add that there are a couple of bands that I would like go to their shows and be like, why do people like this? And then I would have a couple of beers and I'm like, oh, that's why people like them. Got it. I like AC/DC, but let's be real. AC/DC built their career on Budweiser. Like, come on.
I don't like AC/DC, and I completely agree.
I mean, like, on that subject, I've been on an AC/DC kick for like the past like few months on and off, and I'm like, yeah, and it's like, it's like going out is obviously lethal, so I'm just like in my room boogieing out to all these different AC/DC albums, and I will have moments where I'm like, is this weird? Am I actually not enjoying this music the way it was meant to be enjoyed? Which is to say, shit-faced at a stadium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, but at the same time, I'm just like nerding out like hardcore, and I'm like, oh man, I love like that chord choice, or like I love that he goes to like, I love that he does this thing in the bridge, and it sounds like a key change, but it isn't. And I'm like, I'm genuinely enjoying it, but I'm also thinking, it's like, I am not enjoying this the way it was meant to be enjoyed. This is weird.
Like standing up on a chair with bell-bottom jeans and a t-shirt.
And fucking topless.
Weird bangs and long hair.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Blue Lives Matter shirt. No, I'm sorry. I didn't want to get political.
We love our boomers.
We love our boomers.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
I used to love AC/DC when I was like 12.
Well, who didn't?
Accurate.
The very first time I went to a bar was to watch an AC/DC cover band. It's also the saddest thing I've ever seen.
Amazing.
That would be a really fun band to be in.
Yeah. I have actually wanted to be in an AC/DC tribute band for a while.
Oh,
That is completely 100% serious.
I would love to play bass in one. You just have to know A, basically. You just stand there and play A.
It's like 3 notes. You just gotta be on the freaking beat.
Yeah.
Basically.
You're obligated to wear the school uniforms, just so you guys know. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a choice.
I look great in shorts. I'll do it.
Man, I learned you shouldn't high leg kick in those. I did one
Ooh.
show with like track shorts on one time at the Middle East, where the stage is like kind of high up. And I did like a high kick. And the front row went like, oh. And I didn't know why until like one of the guys told me after. They're like, yeah, you should not lift your leg up past a certain height and those things, man. Now we know.
Oh, jeez.
So I was just thinking about like how music is supposed to be heard. Prateek, you and I kind of dabble in the folk tradition.
Yep.
So I think about folk songs. I think about them being sung in pubs. I think about them being like shared around a hearth or something like that. And usually alcohol is a part of it. So I'm thinking about folk music. I'm thinking about like how that is conceptually supposed to be heard, or maybe traditionally supposed to be heard. And there's then this pressure to break tradition. There's also this sort of evolution or like this offshoot of folk music that necessitates a listening room and needs a quieter, more attentive audience. I guess I don't really have a specific question, but what are our thoughts on breaking tradition and on evolving away from the way that things were traditionally?
I guess actually kind of going off like the sort of like the whole AC/DC tangent, like I was joking, but not also joking. It's just like that music, it is like, get shit-faced at a stadium kind of music. And building off of that, I think so many different kinds of music have these like very different specific ways that you're supposed to enjoy them, and very specific preconceptions about how you're supposed to enjoy them. Like a lot of singer-songwriter stuff, it's like, oh yeah, it's like, it's quiet, but you can buy a beer from like this stand way at the back, like sipping your craft ale or whatever. Whereas like, or like, like a loud rock show is just like drink like fucking 12 PBRs. And so I think going off of that whole tradition, there's like all these traditions about how you're supposed to play music and how you're supposed to enjoy it. Sober spaces are really interesting because they kind of are breaking away from that tradition and forging their own. And I think because of that, they're also kind of doing it at their own peril, because a lot of people just, they want to drink while they enjoy music. They want to drink while they're around people. That's the way they know how to be around people. And this isn't even just a thing in like, like small towns where there's really only bars. Like I've lived around the Boston area for most of my life. All jokes aside, it's a relatively cosmopolitan city. Mm-hmm. And I felt really weird about going out when I started like really cutting back and eventually giving up alcohol and most other drugs. The reason I do is because I take Prozac. Alcohol and Prozac, not friends.
Sure. Yeah.
In any capacity. But I felt really weird. And I felt like, yeah, I can't really go out and like see all my friends because they're usually at bars or like at shows. It's just like, I don't like going to house parties because everybody's drinking. I feel weird. They might feel weird, which is going to make me feel even weirder. And I started like, without really realizing it, I started keeping this laundry list in my head of just places that I didn't really enjoy going because there was the expectation that you drink. And that laundry list is most places that people in their 20s usually go when they want to leave the house. And so like, I don't think there's any one person you can point the finger at, but alcohol and socializing, it is a tradition, and it's a widespread tradition. It's a widespread tradition that has taken so many forms that not drinking is this weird, strange thing that people still don't know what to make of.
It's sad how easy it is to like lose friends to not drinking too. Like that was like kind of when I got sober, was the realization that like, I don't know, it's almost like a bad breakup. Like you can't go to the same places. Your friends pick sides. Like it just sucks.
No, totally. Building off of that, another thing it made me really self-conscious about was dating.
Yep. Oh god, yeah.
So people drink on dates, don't they? Well, dang. And funnily enough, like especially since I gave up drinking, any relationships that I've been in, it was where the person and I had like known each other for a while.
Yep.
So we gotten like the chance to feel out each other's personalities without having to go to a bar.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, to kind of backtrack a little bit to the idea of how music is meant to be listened to and how folk is a genre that kind of that kind of celebrates tradition. I think one thing that I think about is that tradition isn't really the point. It's about the application of tradition, where it's kind of like when you see an artist go up on stage and they sound exactly like Bob Dylan, or you see a bluegrass band that looks like they got out of a time machine from, the Great Depression. Like a lot of people make fun of those people or kind of joke about it, where they're just kind of gimmicky, embodying folk music.
We're talking about Mumford & Sons, right?
Yeah, it's like they're an example for sure. Yeah, but we love bands that take old like American folk or Celtic shit or literally just these traditions and these sounds and bring them to the modern life and to modern perspectives and to the present day. And I think that we could be doing that with sober spaces too, where like, who is to say that in 20, 30, 40 years that this maybe people will be commodifying sober spaces?
I mean, it's already happening on a very small scale.
Yeah. So this sounds like some type of like Portlandia skit in the making, like for when sober spaces are one day some type of staple of DIY folky people. And I think that in a way, like, even if there are a lot of people who don't socialize or date without drinking, I find in my life a lot of people, like, something that people, I bet everybody in this chat somebody has told this to. I have a lot of friends that hang out with me. Well, not right now, but like who will say that it's refreshing to hang out with me because I'm not smoking weed constantly or drinking.
Yeah.
And they're like, damn, man, I haven't thought about weed for 8 hours. And I'm like, what? Like, me neither. But, like,
crazy, right?
Yeah. But like, and I appreciate that. I'm glad that that's like a feature of hanging out with me, but I would gamble money that there is a chance it will become fashionable, in the future. Because there's a lot of people that just want authenticity. They don't want this kind of Instagram likes, only having sex drunk, like dating people you don't give a fuck about, like club bullshit. Like there are people that do that really wish they didn't do that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I agree with that. And I think that's less of a becoming fashionable thing that has to do with like the specific year. And I think it actually has more to do with age.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so when I turned 27, I had this like whole moment where I'm just like, oh man, I'm in my late 20s. And I had this, and then I was like, oh, I can hang out with my friends at places that aren't bars.
Yeah.
Because people are going to start thinking that's cool.
Yeah.
And I'm not even kidding. I'm 28 now. I'm going to be turning 29 this year. That is the attitude that like I'm carrying into my 30s. I'm like, oh my God, I can see my friends again.
Yeah. I don't have to be cool anymore.
I get to be lame. Oh, this is going to be so, and it's like, and that goes back into like, there's all these expectations about how you're supposed to hang out with people and enjoy music and enjoy life and take substances or not take substances. I think that even though a lot of us maybe don't consciously think about it, I think a lot of us are aware that there is a very specific script for how that is all supposed to play out over the course of your life.
Yeah.
And it's something that because I stopped drinking, I like started cutting back and eventually stopped drinking on when I was like around 26 or so. it felt weird then, and it's slowly feeling less and less weird as I get older. And I hit the age where, like, partying becomes this more specific thing, where it's like, you see people in their 30s and 40s, like a very specific kind of people who still party really hard. And people are just like, nah, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah. And it goes back to the agency thing, too. Because, like, when I decided to, quote unquote, not be sober anymore, which is not really what was happening, but I was thinking a lot about, like, am I only socializing on my own terms? And, like, am I going to be maybe viewed as a grump for being like that? So it's like if someone asks me, oh, do you want to get a drink sometime? And I go, like, how about coffee? Which usually means, like, you're meeting earlier in the day, and, you know, it limits when you can socialize, when you can have certain interactions.
Stomach's gonna hurt.
Stomach's gonna hurt. So I'm like, well, if I only am ever, like, reframing the socialization to be on my terms, is that going to be harmful to relationships? And again, I'm really just talking about socialization here. I don't want to push anybody out of recovery. So, like, don't do this if you are in recovery. But yeah, so it was just like, can I kind of test my boundaries? Can I kind of test my threshold a little bit and see, like, does this limit still exist with me? Does this, like, discomfort still exist in me? And if I just sort of make a, like, I guess I viewed it as a sacrifice at the time. Like, if I just, like, make a sacrifice and adhere to other people's social standards just once, what does that feel like? And can I then, like, will it then give me some strength that I didn't have before? Just in knowing that I'm not, like, endangering myself by saying yes to someone else's suggestion. Because I think for a long time that was a big fear that I had.
Where did you fall on that? Like, what have you determined?
I think I very successfully took back the agency that I needed to. Like, it felt good. It felt like, okay, this is great. I forgot that I actually, like, do enjoy a beer now and then. But it doesn't have to be, like, I can do that on my terms while still be serving somebody else's agenda. Not agenda, but, like, somebody else's desire. So, I don't know. But again, for me, it's not a recover thing. For me, it was all just, like, I got sick of the way certain friends or certain types of friends went about their social lives, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And also, I was seeing way too many people, like, drive irresponsibly, and didn't really want to be complicit in that anymore. So I was just like, I'll leave this whole scene behind. But I think where I ultimately ended up falling on that was like, oh yeah, I don't just have to go out for coffee with people. If someone invites me for a beer, I'll have a beer with them. That didn't at all change how I feel about sober spaces. I think that they should be way more popular than they are. I think they should be commodified. I think they should be a viable choice for anybody who wants to go out. And I would probably still choose them the majority of the time if it was my choice. But I wanted to make sure that if I were socializing with anybody, it could still be their choice where we go.
That's interesting.
Well, that begs the question of how do you commodify something that isn't alcohol in that situation? Like, just if you were running an actual bar in the city. Like, actually, I remember, have you guys been to Sonia?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
So that was like the TT's, when they closed, the TT the Bear's liquor license is like a separate entity legally. And that thing was, they were selling juice. Like, they were essentially a juice bar. And that was like the biggest kind of black mark on them for the longest time. And they're still around, I think, partially because of, like, the ownership of that building. But, like, there was a lot of weirdness about, like, shit, how the hell do we make money? Like, we can't necessarily always make it on ticket sales.
Yep.
You can't sell a Coke or an orange juice for $9, but you can sell a Budweiser for some reason.
Yeah.
So what do you charge for, you know?
Right now, we are kind of re-arriving at the idea that, like, a root of like a kind of sabotaging element to the arts, to sober spaces, to music is the fact that we have to commodify these things or else we won't be allowed to enjoy them. Like, the way we justify making music and making art is by making it make money for us. So we don't die, or so nobody thinks we're a fucking loser, or so we can pay our bills. You know what I mean? And, like, we are being forced to do that because of the political state of our country and our economy. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of believe that the political landscape of your country determines what kind of famous people exist. It's 100%. Kind of a weird take. Yeah, but no, like, you know,
completely accurate.
Like, there could never be a famous billionaire in a communist country. You know what I mean? Well, there's not going to be a famous coal miner in a capitalist country that's famous because they're so sick at their job.
Yep.
And like, and I think that is kind of a big problem, is the fact that like, I don't know, man, I have no idea what the solution is, because like, it sucks because it's not even at this point, it's not even about whether or not sober spaces are good or bad, helpful, or music or art or whatever. It's literally, where's the money going to come from?
Yep. And so much of that money comes from selling Bud Light.
Yeah, seriously. You guys should get a Bud Light sponsorship for this podcast. We've been talking about them a lot.
Yup.
You might be able to commodify
wait.
this.
Well, now for podcast,
make a little money here.
For podcast, you got to go with the like artisan coffee roaster sponsorship.
Right. Me
Oh,
and
This
this.
episode,
Oh, yeah.
This episode was sponsored by
Squarespace.
Trade Coffee.
Yeah. But yeah, and I think it's a fucking bummer. And I don't know, maybe in the future there will be more DIY spaces like that get grants or get some type of endowment, or art institutions, you know, treat community and organizing and group art and art that isn't white cube bullshit as a valid receptacle for their funding. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine, Joel? Like, I don't know if you like with like Woolen Springs. I mean, fucking Woolen Mills. Can you imagine if that wasn't contingent on your job or money or whatever, but there was some art institution that gave you a grant to run that and to promote it and to and it supported it as the art making, community building, talent creation that it was.
Or even if it was supported by the community.
Yeah, or like
Which it wasn't.
because that does happen. That does happen with galleries, with Boston art schools, with institutions, with SOA galleries. Like that type of funding exists, but it's scarce. You know,
Yeah.
especially I don't know.
No,
Anyway,
it's completely true. And like, not to keep harping on about this, but like Brian, you've been like bringing this up in like so many different brilliant ways. It's
Thanks.
like, you know, for us to be able to keep making music, we have to make money. For us to make money, we have to get people to see it. If you want people and you want money, the fastest way to that is booze.
Yeah.
yeah,
And that is one of the realities that the music industry has kind of built itself around.
yeah. And one interesting thing to consider too is that, you know, maybe in the future they won't really have to sell alcohol, but like, I don't know. Like, can you imagine if there was a fucking hookah bar music venue? Wouldn't be great to try to make everybody smoke hookah and to sell fucking whatever that is, whatever that shit is. But
Electric Haze over
Electric
in Worcester.
Haze, yeah.
Yeah.
So what if it became a normal thing for normal everyday businesses to get a grant to open up their doors at night to artists?
yeah,
Oh,
Like
that
a
would
yoga
be great.
studio or
That would be
something like that.
amazing.
That's a great idea. But going off of that, like, isn't it also a problem that just most places that don't serve alcohol are not open late at night?
yeah.
Like, there used to be this place in Worcester called the Java Hut, and they were just a coffee shop. I don't think they served any alcohol, and they were open till 2 a.m. along with the rest of the bars in Worcester. So like during all bar hours, you could be at, you know, a coffee shop instead, and they would have poetry readings, and it was like, it's right down the street from Clark University, so like they had a lot of the college crowd coming in. But yeah, they had poetry readings, they had open mic nights, they had like all the things that you would want in like a bar setting that offers space for artists without the bar pressures.
Well, that's a totally different thing. Of our society has to someday accept that some people are night owls, and we need more 24-hour things to do other than go to Planet Fitness and diners.
Yeah.
Yeah, McDonald's.
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, it's another thing that this is kind of a shitty idea, I think, and it wouldn't work that well probably. But like, I wonder like if there's even some opportunity in the idea of not just selling shit at shows, but even if there was more public awareness about ways to support shows where like, I don't know, it's almost like this socialist idea where the government will provide more things for its citizens if the taxes are higher. Where like maybe a music venue could do more if people were willing to contribute more for a door cover. You know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I have like kind of scoffed at the idea of paying $25 for a show, or, you know, I you know, just like everybody has, but I mean, in a DIY, I don't want to give $25 to get into a club just so some asshole that owns the club gets the money. But I probably would if I had a job and I had a little bit of money and I knew that the money was going to be supporting.
Yeah.
Like it was a community investment and it was going to people that would, are using it to benefit the community.
Yeah.
Maybe
what about
people would do
subscriptions or something like that?
Yeah.
So it's like you pay $25 a month and you can come here as much as you want or something like
That's
that.
That's actually I think you're onto something with that, even with something like the chess company where like, can you imagine if there were shows or open mics every night at a place and you got to go and participate and do whatever you wanted for $10 a month anytime?
Well, it's ridiculous too that like if you're going to see a friend play at a bar, the expectation is you will probably spend, on top of maybe a door charge, like $25 on drinks that night.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
for sure.
Why is it any different to go to, a DIY space or any kind of sober space and pay more for a cover charge?
Yep. But that's the thing is like the people trust the booze more than they trust the music.
Right, because sometimes the booze makes them appreciate the music.
Can I rant about a situation that happened when
Please
I think
do.
it was Pale and Frail, Matt, Justin, and I were on tour at this, I don't know if it was a bar or a restaurant, and the manager got mad because I was trying to sell something, which is fine. Like I shouldn't have been trying to sell something in this business. But his thing was, well, you're not even drinking anything. Why should I let you make money if you're not giving me money? But they did not provide anything other than alcohol, really, and water.
Yeah.
And so it was like I literally had become less of a commodity because they were not willing to sell a cup of coffee.
Yeah, and you're like, dude, I've drank like 3 pitchers of dusty free water. What more do you want from me?
So no, I had actually at that place tried to buy something else, but they didn't provide anything other than alcohol.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's where the failure of creativity comes in, where these businesses probably could actually think of a lot of different ideas and gimmicks and methods of bringing in more income, but they're not. They're just like, well, we fucking sell beer because of drink beer, make money.
Yeah, well, and like that's the thing is like because that works. Like it's like, people, like bars sell alcohol because that's a good way to make money. And if you're sober, it's like people think you're going to be, like judging them. Morally righteous.
Or you're a buzzkill.
You're a buzzkill, you're a cop, and you're not profitable.
Yeah, no, we kind of suck.
Fuck you, get out of our capitalism.
Yeah, basically. I was just like, I just want to hang out and drink ginger ale, okay? I want friends! No, this is literally me every minute of my life. I'm not fucking kidding.
Yeah.
I think attitudes are changing a lot, though, too. Like, we're still working off the old model that was kind of espoused by, like, the boomers and Gen X and stuff. Like, a lot of those old ways that to run a venue, you had to run a bar, and to run a bar, you have to sell beer, and this is what it means to function kind of under this paradigm. But now, like, millennials and other generations are asking, like, just the fact that we're talking about this, is probably different from what a lot of generations would bring to this topic. So, like,
good point.
The idea of what sobriety means, what mental health means, what music and performance and venues all mean, like, those things are being redefined so profoundly that I kind of wonder in like 20 years, 30 years, what's it going to be like? Where will beer be the thing that we feel like we need to sell in order to exist? Or it could be weed, I mean, it might not be better
Probably
in the
weed.
sense of being sober, but it's like
it's weed. End of story.
Yeah, that's gonna be weird.
That's really not.
Have you been to a dispensary? Because they look like Apple stores.
No, but I mean, the fact that something like weed can go 40 years ago was like something you bring in by bales on a plane in the middle of the night. And now it's like you drive down to the dispensary and you get it because your insurance is paying for it. Like, that's a huge change.
That is a huge change.
So I wonder what'll happen in the sense of like music. Will we start to realize that like, shit, when we go to bars, they're not venues and we're not going to see our friend's band play. We're going to get hammered. So maybe they're separate activities. And like, I think there's just going to be a lot of change around stuff like this.
Don't do parties, don't do drugs, don't go out